I wanted to let you know that my course for Chessable on the Sicilian Kalashnikov is on sale at the moment. Do check it out. I'm really proud of this course. Spent a lot of time and effort on it, and it's getting great reviews, I'm delighted to say. Basically, the course comprises two distinct sections. There's the repertoire in the usual Chessable format. There we go. That's the Kalashnikov, or the start of the Kalashnikov variation on the board. So, sorry, as I was saying, one section is the usual repertoire from this position in the Chessable format that involves repetition. So you learn the variations by rote, with, of course, lots of explanation. And the second section is the model games. So what I've done is select classic games with the Kalashnikov and explain them in great detail, so you have an idea of strategy, so that if you go into a middle game, you have some kind of idea of what you should be doing, even if you can't remember the exact repertoire. And even if you do, once you get to the end of the lines, of course you need to have an idea of what strategy is possible in the position. So what I want to do is show you a recent game with the Kalashnikov. I was delighted to see this game. It was played in the FIDE Grand Swiss Chess.com Grand Swiss tournament in Riga just a couple of weeks ago. And the player of the black pieces goes down one of my recommendations, and it's fantastic to see that the variation works in practice. And two strong players, Maxim Chigaev from Russia, he's in his mid-20s, rated 2639. Player of the black pieces, Cristobal Henriquez from Chile. Without further ado, now knight b5 played here. That is the best move. What's funny is that I've explained this previously. White has other options here. None of these moves are particularly good. Black can equalise very easily against the other continuations. Knight b5 is the only move that really offers white chances for an advantage. But actually, a lot of players at club level are kind of afraid to play this move, because suddenly the knight is out on a limb, and indeed black gets lots of play because it takes time for white to regroup with that knight. So here there are two main moves. White can play knight c3, or you can play c4. And that's what happened in this game. Now the thing with c4 is that this kind of exploits the fact that the knight hasn't moved to c3. So white gets this big clamp on the d5 square. But there are big drawbacks to this big clamp, namely that the d4 square is weak. And indeed all the squares behind those pawns, so as we'll see. So bishop e6, there are various ways that black can play this position. Some like to play with bishop e7, but my recommendation in the course is this idea of g6, the fianchetto with the bishop. And this can give black a chance to play the knight into d4. Knight d4 was even possible in that position. Knight f6, bishop e3, so okay, pretty standard development. And this is a very important position. You can see that white has succeeded in bringing the knight back to c2, and that does cover the d4 square, preventing this knight from moving in. So it all looks very regular, and well, in the course I go into this position in some detail, looking at moves such as queen d2, f3 to secure the e-pawn, and indeed b3. That's the move that was played in this game. So b3, and it looks very logical to support the pawn on c4, set up this pawn chain if white is trying to control the centre. But here is where the shock comes for white. b5. So this classic freeing move against the Morozzi bind, b5, breaking down that pawn on c4. That's taken. And here, well, Black follows a move that was played by Parham Marsudlu from Iran, and he defeated Anand with this move, knight e7. I think I might have shown that game on the channel before. It's an absolutely brilliant game. It's a game that I discuss in the course as well. In fact, my recommendation in the course is to play pawn takes pawn, and now an unusual move, knight a7. This is actually the strongest continuation for Black, and the idea is this: it opens up the c-file. Those knights are vulnerable here. That's why b5 was played. And if bishop takes knight, all those pieces are loose. Compare it with Black's very compact, solid, coordinated piece formation. Queen a8, hitting the bishop. Knight takes pawn happens. And it's Black that controls the centre with these wonderful kingside pawns and those central pawns as well. This is so often the story of this variation, as we will see. Anyway, if you want details of that, do check out the course. But here, as I said, Henriquez plays knight e7, also very interesting, opening up the c-file. And Vishy Anand played bishop d2 against Marsudlu, and the game went like this. Marsudlu sacrificed the exchange here to destroy Anand's centre, and well, a really crazy game, but eventually basically Marsudlu's pawns went through, and he got through to Vishy's king. It was a brilliant game, but instead of bishop d2, in this game Chigaev played knight a4, allowing the pawn on e4 to be taken, but he's managed to get a pawn on a6, and it is defended by the bishop. So this is really ambitious, very ambitiously played by White. A bit greedy, grabbing a pawn. As compensation, Black has these wonderful pawns. In fact, d5 is possible right now, but instead, knight d5. So these knights looking to come in on the c3 square, and there it goes. Knight c3, queen d2. e4 is possible here for Black, but instead the knight came back. Queen b4, again d5 is possible. Rook b8, hitting the queen, and queen a3. So it looks as though White might have achieved something in moving the queen to a3 behind the pawn, but watch what happens now. d5, those centre pawns, as is so often the case in the Kalashnikov, power through. First of all, the rook has to be moved, bishop comes back, and knight c3. So that knight returns to this beautiful c3 square, and that has indeed turned into an octopus, controlling key squares in the position, preventing those rooks moving to d1 and b1, and that is such a great piece. Bishop c5 before d4 comes, locking out the bishop. But wow, those pawns now supported by the rook, queen, and the bishops, and indeed the knight. Life is actually very difficult for White. That pawn, well, it's gone a long way down the board, but actually White can't really do much with it. And now Black has the initiative. d4, queen d7. So Black introduces the possibility perhaps to sack the exchange, just to get rid of that pawn, get rid of the bishop. Rook ec8, again, a little bit more pressure here. So those pieces looking a bit vulnerable. If the queen is expelled, then the bishop could be hanging. Knight c4, so Black decides, okay, I've had enough of that knight. That looks a bit risky. Don't want it coming in on b6, so he just exchanges it off. And e4, and the threat is simply d3, d2, and yeah, nasty for White. You can see how controlling the d1 square with that knight makes life extremely difficult for White. And here White completely cracks. his position is very difficult, but f3 is pretty suicidal. Once the king opens up, then black is going to have a lot of fun. I can understand the motivation behind f3 to break up these wonderful pawns, but yeah, particularly with the queen so far away, dare I say it, in Siberia, then you can see that white's king really is going to be in trouble. It just lacks defenders. I mean, all these pieces are just the wrong side of black's pawns. d3, and this opens up a new possibility, basically using this square. So for example, if pawn takes pawn, rook takes c5, it's a killer. If queen takes, bishop d4 check wins the queen. Bishop e3, rook takes. So black doesn't care about this because the queen will come in, and those pawns are just too strong. Pawn takes pawn, rook b7, queen a5, d2, hitting the rook. Knight takes pawn. That knight is swinging round, protecting this pawn here, and don't forget this diagonal. That is pretty nasty. We could have some action like this if bishop takes. Well, we could go queen d4 check, and I think you know what's coming in this kind of position. King f1, queen f2 mate, and king here. Yes, folks, we've seen it all before. That one, that's justice. Instead, queen d5 played. Bishop takes rook in the corner. Yep, that bishop plays a strong part in this system. And now black is just the exchange up. And it's completely winning. And here the final move was bishop d4. There you go. Just getting through to the king. Very simple, actually. Bishop takes, queen takes. I mean, white resigned after bishop d4, but let's just see what could have happened. Simple move, rook e7 and rook e1, followed by mate is coming. I mean, every picture tells a story, and that is the story of central domination. So often the case in the Kalashnikov. Just want to bring you right back to the position after b5, so that knocks away one of the centre pawns. And we had this position that knocks out the e-pawn, and then, yeah, it took a little bit of time, but basically that is the story of this game. Those pawns stomped down the board, and yeah, it's all about the centre. Look at black's central control there. That's the key thing so often in the Kalashnikov. So, like I said, do check out the course. It's on sale at Chessable right now. Not quite sure for how long. So do check it out. I'll put the links down there in the comments and the video description so you can click through and check out a sample video.